Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Online X gathering. Today's webinar is entitled, Why Now is the Time to Launch Your E-Commerce Business, and is presented by Andy Higgins, Managing Director of U-Africa. Andy is an experienced professional in all aspects of e-commerce, including online marketplaces, payments, and logistics. He founded Bid or Buy and was instrumental in starting PayFast in South Africa, while also having been involved in the early stages of CATALOGUE.com. Pretty impressive. So he's a true knowledge expert in all aspects of e-commerce. Andy will be sharing his wisdom and experiences, and he'll be giving us guidance and resources to help us cash in on the e-commerce wave. The webinar will run for approximately 1 hour, which will be made up of a talk by Andy for around 40 to 45 minutes, followed by Q&A. Throughout the session, we'll be running a live chat for you to post comments and questions, and we're running live polls as well. So we encourage everyone to please get involved. Without further delay, I'd like to hand over to Andy Higgins. Andy.
Thanks, Dennis, for that introduction. So as Dennis said, I'm going to be talking to you about why there has never been a better time to launch an e-commerce business, and specifically in South Africa. I'm actually, I mean, if there is a silver lining to this pandemic, it's got to be, for me, certainly, what's happened in the e-commerce space during this time. I'm actually sometimes a bit embarrassed when I speak to people and I see how other businesses are struggling so much during these difficult times, whereas, you know, sort of in the businesses I'm involved with, particularly in the e-commerce space, it's been a crazy time with some really amazing growth. So much so that some people have even said that that this is really has acted as a catalyst and accelerated us 20 years forward. So where we're at now in 2020 is where we might have only been in 2030 if it hadn't have been for this pandemic. So I thought I'd start by just maybe just having a look at South Africa versus the rest of the world, just doing a bit of a comparison. I've worked in a number of other countries around the world. I've worked in the e-commerce space in Australia, in the US, I've been involved in Canada and Europe and the UK. And in most of those markets, in Asia as well, in India, and in most of those markets, there was a period of time where e-commerce experienced some exponential growth. Malcolm Gladwell talks about the tipping point. You might have heard about knee of the curve, or maybe just hockey stick growth, or an inflection point, whatever you call it. These e-commerce markets had this sort of exponential growth where e-commerce just grew over a period of time very quickly. As far as I can tell in South Africa, we've never had that sort of growth, actually, perhaps up until now. But just looking back, we've pretty much experienced linear growth, maybe between 20 and 40% growth, sort of fairly consistent, but off a relatively low base. And from as you may have imagined, going through the pandemic now, this acting as a catalyst has really accelerated us. And I think it's maybe a bit too early to tell, but I actually think now is our time for South Africa, where we are seeing this sort of exponential growth happening. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about, so for South Africa, so we don't have updated numbers. I think so the jury is maybe a little bit out, and I don't want to preempt it. And we're not sure exactly, whether we're going to be able to maintain the sort of growth that we've had. But the latest sort of more official numbers that we have is that online retail accounted for, this is from 2018 numbers, for the year of 2018, about 14 billion Rand in online retail in South Africa. That's out of the total retail market of 1 trillion Rand. So if you work that out as a percentage, it's about 1.4%. There's no doubt that we've experienced growth now well above that. But if you compare it to other, certainly developed markets and even developing markets, we're still well behind, with many other markets being in excess of 10%, where online is in excess of 10% of total retail. So I thought what I would do is start off with a poll that asks you, what do you think the impact of COVID-19 pandemic has had on the growth of e-commerce in South Africa? So you can see option A there's, it's actually halved, or has it stayed the same, or has it doubled or tripled? So I'd be interested to see what you think. So while we wait for those results to come in, I came across this graph here, which is from the US, which shows that during the initial period of the lockdown, that was in the US, where you're looking at sort of 16% growth on the results are in. So I said, okay, most people have said 3 times the growth has tripled, and second most is 2. And I think, obviously I don't know exactly what the number is. It's more anecdotal for me, but it certainly is between 2 and 3 times as far as we can tell. This graph here in the US showed that just during that initial period of the lockdown went from 16% to 27%. That's phenomenal if you think total retail was 27, basically from this, just in that month period, it almost doubled. What I can show you though, this is the actual numbers that I can share with you. This is the number of shipments on New Africa. So this is the daily shipments that we process per day. And if you have a look here, this is starting from the beginning of 2018, going through the year. This is Black Friday, the Black Friday period. So it's sort of latter November 2018. You can see the spike, and then the subsequent dip over the sort of Christmas, New Year period. And then it slowly builds up again to Black Friday, Cyber Monday weekend last year in 2019. And then the expected dip again after that. And then coming back January, February, March. And then here, very interesting, you can see very clearly in April what happened during the hard lockdown, where it went down to almost nothing. I think we were about 10% of our normal volumes for only essential goods that could get shipped. And then as the restrictions got lifted, you can see it coming back and bouncing way back now. to a point now where we're doing almost 10,000 shipments per day on our platform. And that, I can tell you, is a tripling from where it was pre-lockdown. So yeah, quite phenomenal. So while many people were without work and cutting back, we were experiencing this sort of amazing growth over this time. So next, I just wanted to speak about, I guess, the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and that's Amazon, or perhaps in South Africa, we could liken it to CATALOGUE. I think the perception out there is that Amazon is killing it, and they're crushing small business. I think to some extent that is true, but there's a very strong drive around supporting small business and the growth thereof. And also, one thing that some people don't realize as well is that a very important part of Amazon's business is their marketplace. And the same is true for the likes of Takealot and others, in that for example, more than 50% of the goods sold on Amazon are actually sold by third-party sellers, so through their marketplace. It's not actually sold by Amazon. And furthermore, while there's a concerted effort for traditional offline retailers to go online, Amazon is kind of growing in the other direction. And in 2018, they bought the Whole Foods market. It's a grocery chain in the US. They spent $14 billion purchasing that business. So they're actually shifting their business from online to offline, and they've actually stated specifically that for them, a successful strategy for the future includes a combination of both online and offline. The truth is that we can't replicate all the experiences of offline online. So anything that involves senses like touch and even taste and feel and that sort of thing, particularly when it comes to things like clothing and all that, it's very hard to replicate online. So there's definitely still a place for that offline element, which leads me on to the next poll. This was a report I saw a while ago, so it could have changed, but I'm curious to know what you would think. Where does South Africa rank in the world per capita, so relative to the size of the population, on shopping mall space? So there was some research done on how much square meter each of shopping mall space there is compared to the people in the population of that country. And where do you think South Africa ranked in that report? So, interesting, number 5. So actually the report I saw, so most people are saying that I think we ranked about 5th. The report I saw ranked us actually number 2 after the US. So that was a bit of a surprise for me, but maybe not so much, because I've always spoken about South Africa having this shopping mall culture. And I think that's true. I certainly don't fit into that demographic, but it seems like for whatever reason, certainly pre-lockdown, South Africans enjoyed the shopping mall experience, and this led to a proliferation of a lot of shopping mall space. Yeah, even I remember those, just anecdotally thinking back when we started Bid or Buy, which was back in 1999. We sort of were young and maybe a bit arrogant, and we're kind of like, watch out, mass mart, here we come, we know we're going to eat your lunch, we're going to take your business away. But being a bit older and wiser now, I think it's fair to say that there's, and certainly the lines are becoming more blurred. It's not really a case of offline versus online, but it's more, it's sort of coming together, and it's more about how one can combine the two. I mean, if you think about it, there's a lot of things that sort of blur those lines. If you take, for example, I mean, a lot of people might do their research online for something that they want to purchase, but they actually go to a physical store to make the purchase. Or vice versa, something that became very popular in the US was something that was termed showrooming, where people would go into a physical store, especially like a computer store, like something like Best Buys or something like that, and they would get assistance from the salesperson and actually touch and feel a computer or something, a laptop or telephone or something like that. And then they would price shop online for that. So they would be doing their research offline, but actually buying it online. The other thing that's quite popular in South Africa is click and collect. In an earlier survey that we have done, more than half of the buyers that we surveyed indicated that they would like to shop in that way, where they would basically order online but go and fetch in person. I mean, that is also, again, a combination of the two. And even now, I guess during lockdown, what's become more common is this, I'm not sure if there's what the term would be, but that kind of like shopping assistance, where people will shop on your behalf. So there's a lot of more services. There's apps out there where you can place your order through the app, and someone will actually go into a physical store, make the purchase, and the good ones, or even if a particular product is not available in real time, they will ask you, can they replace it with another product? And you can sort of interact in that way. And again, I mean, that's sort of a combination of the two. So I think we're going to see this trend accelerated, particularly from the pandemic, and we're going to see a lot of alternate delivery methods coming, ways of different home deliveries, also other mechanisms, be it things like Pudo, which is pick up drop-off points, or lockers. We're going to see a lot of this, and there's definitely this sort of morphing between online and offline. And then you throw into that social media as well, and there's all sorts of channels, and we're going to talk a bit more about that later, which you might have come across that the buzzword omni-channel or multi-channel selling. What we're also seeing is a lot of people who may have previously rented shopping space for 12 months throughout the year. They might now look at only having a physical presence in certain events or flea markets or in a shopping mall, even perhaps as like a pop-up store or something like that. Also, you're going to see, I believe, I mean, it's already happening, but I think it's still in the early stages, is what's been dubbed conversational commerce, which is more over like instant messaging platforms like WhatsApp and other instant messaging platforms, where it's also a bit more informal trade happening. So I think it's important as we talk about e-commerce to think about how you're going to position yourself in this new world, which is more, I believe is going to be even more so, this omni-channel world, where you need to be able to sell across multiple channels. You need to be able to reach your customers through the channels through which they want to interact with you. Okay, just to switch things a little bit, I thought I would just give you a bit more of my history. When we started BiddleBuy, which I was 23 years old actually when we first started speaking to the investors that invested in it. I was working in London for a company there called QXL, which was supposed to be the answer to eBay in UK and Europe. And basically, I helped them launch, I was more on their technical team. I helped them launch a number of sites throughout Europe. And I was kind of homesick, I guess. I wanted to come back to South Africa, and this was the one thing I knew how to do. And so one of the people I was working with there, she suggested that I speak to her father, who happened to be an investor in that business I was working at. I ended up flying over to Israel. I met with him and his partners, his investment partners. And basically within a period of a few weeks, they had agreed to invest, I think it was $250,000 at the time, for us to start what is now BiddleBuy, basically. So I ended up coming back to South Africa, and initially first launched the site actually from my brother's flat in London. I came back to South Africa, and through discussions with these investors, they felt we were thinking too small. There was a lot more opportunity in other parts of the world. So within a period of a few months, we had decided to actually base ourselves in Australia. I ended up in Sydney a month later. I recruited a team, mostly South African team, that came over there. They said we're thinking too small. There was the whole of Asia, there was South America, there was parts of Europe that we could also launch in. So we were caught in the midst of, I guess, what was now called the dot-com boom in the late 90s and early 2000s. So late 99 and early 2000. And we ended up raising in a short period of time $12 million. and hired a bunch of people, and it was a crazy time. You know, they said it was, you know, any two guys with a business plan with .com in it could raise $2 million. It kind of was like that. So we were riding the wave, but then we launched, or we're about to launch we launched South Africa first. India was actually our second site, then Australia, Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, Spain, Italy, with Hong Kong and Israel. We launched a Hebrew site. That was interesting. But then what happened was in March 2000, the .com crash happened. So we talk about the .com crash because that's when the NASDAQ peaked. But when I look, I don't see it as a sort of an event, or being in it at the time. It wasn't like an event that happened, or something fairly gradual over a few periods of a few months. And so we were about to raise additional $50 million to grow this business internationally. And we were unable to do that because of the .com crash, and ended up merging with a former competitor in India who had just raised money before the crash. But we ended up having to close most of our other businesses. We kept South Africa, India kept running. We ended up selling our Australian business to eBay, actually, in Australia. And actually, we thought we were going to go out of business. I remember being quite relieved when I was told, yeah, we need to shut things down, because it was just hectic, crazy time. But somehow we managed to hold on. I ended up actually coming back to South Africa. We had employed, you know, literally hundreds of people around the world. We had a tech team in Sydney of about 30 people building out our technology, which we did launch a new technology platform. But we had to cut everything back. I came back to South Africa. And so we went from hundreds of people essentially to, at our lowest point, myself and one other being employed by the company. This was during the period of 2001 to 2004, which I call the sort of dark ages of the internet, particularly in South Africa. It's crazy to think that, you know, back then there wasn't even ADSL. You had to dial in to get internet access. So you're paying Telkom per minute to be online. And that is what we were dealing with back then. But slowly things changed. I think it was around 2005, ADSL came, it became, you know, more mainstream, more people came online. And I remember, I think around like 2007, sitting in front of my computer, being a bit of the geek that I am, looking at the log files of Buy, seeing, you know, there were times I wouldn't look at the site for literally weeks because it was kind of quite dead actually. But I sort of noticed more and more this traffic coming through. And back then you could see very clearly what the referring traffic was, and what people, what it was basically traffic mostly coming from Google, and you could see what the search terms were that people were searching. So people would search for, you know, Apple, iPod or something like that. And then if you search that term in Google, you'd see Buy would rank very high, normally often number one, purely because there was not a lot of other content. There wasn't a lot of competition out there. So our business went from, like, actually over a period of about a year or two, organically started growing very quickly as sort of Google became more popular and more people searched, and sort of internet became a bit more mainstream in South Africa. So in 2007, we actually took investment from a hedge fund, a New York-based hedge fund. We raised a few $1 million, and we were able to sort of gradually grow the business to a point where it's now, I think, about 70 people employed in the business now. And it's a sustainable business. But yeah, it was very interesting ride, lots of ups and downs. And I think we still do have those ups and downs. It feels like we're currently on a bit of an up because, you know, it's just, we're getting this sort of artificial boost from COVID, the COVID effect. But I think for me, looking back, one of the big differences is, you know, when we started Buy, we had to employ a team of 30 developers to build the platform. And it took us over a year just for the first version to build that site. So whereas now you can you can do it in days. You can launch a new website and have technology that is superior to what we had by a long way back then, and at an absolute fraction of the cost. So you can go and sign up for a site through a cloud provider like Shopify and hook up a payment gateway, and you can literally be accepting orders, in some cases even on the same day at a stretch, which wasn't anywhere possible, you know, even going back a decade, I'd say. So that's one of the reasons why I think, you know, now if you haven't launched an e-commerce site, you don't have an e-commerce presence, there's definitely never a better or easier time to do it than now. So that leads me on to, I like to refer to what I call the 4 pillars of e-commerce. The first pillar that I refer to is the catalog. So the second one is online payments, and the third is logistics. And then the fourth one is marketing. So obviously, in order to sell online, you need a website. And like I mentioned, there's a lot of different options out there. 2 of my favorites to suggest would be Shopify and WooCommerce. Shopify, I think if you maybe less technically minded, is a good option. You can go out and you can, like I say, you can sign up and get going very quickly. And you don't have to be very technical. It's kind of something you would think even my mother could do without much assistance. Whereas WooCommerce, more an open source solution, you need to get your own hosting. You need to there's some more technical considerations around security and backup and that sort of thing. And you need to get your own hosting. So you may want to have someone else who can help you throughout that process. I think perhaps maybe one of the more important, other than the platform, one of the things you need to think about very carefully is what you're going to sell. And I think that can be quite a more difficult choice to make up front if you're not already in a business and already have a product to sell. So for me, I think it's quite important to choose a product that's ideally as high margin as possible. So things that are commodities like say computers and books and DVDs and that sort of thing, I think you're going to find it very hard because there's a lot of competition and you cannot command a high margin. So it's going to become very difficult when you factor in all the costs of running your site, from the payment gateway and possible platform fees and all your marketing. It's going to be difficult. Whereas if you can find more of a niche product and you can generally command a much higher margin. And if you can be a subject matter expert on that, it's going to really help you. It's going to allow you to build a business, a much stronger business behind that, and even build a brand where people are more likely to come back to you. You're also going to be more likely to have success on some of the third-party marketplaces, because they're going to actively seek out people like you to sort of increase what they call the long tail on their website. And where some of the more commodity stuff, like if you take a lot of Amazon, for example, if you're selling computers, say, you're actually going to be competing against them directly as well. Whereas maybe if you, I don't know, let's say you're an expert in, say, fishing and fishing gear and all of that, for example, you can actually give people advice. You can sort of more easily, readily own that vertical, that niche. So on the second pillar, online, on the payment gateway, so in my view, this is also a bit of a commoditized thing. I don't think it matters too much as long as you go with one of the reputable providers out there. So here are some examples you could look at. Generally, from a price point of view, I think it's important to note that you can negotiate with them, especially if you've got volume. So they'll normally all publish, sort of have their published listed rates. I would say just go initially with one that's the easiest and the quickest to get up and running, because it's also something that you can change quite easily later on. So if for whatever reason you feel later on that you want to go with a different provider, it's generally not a big deal to change, and it doesn't really impact your customers at all, really. I think perhaps the most important consideration that you want to take into account is the trust and security. So from all the polls and surveys that we've done in the past on consumers, by far the single biggest concern that comes out is around trust and security. So very important, you want to make sure that your website is secure. So platforms like Shopify, it's literally, I think it's by default now. It used to be you click a button, but I think now it's just by default. Your website will be secure. That's HTTPS at the top with SSL certificate. That's an absolute must. It also helps with your rankings and all that on Google, but from a security point of view, it's a must. You basically want your customers to feel as safe as possible. So you need to make sure you've got well-defined returns policies, make sure that people can get hold of you, contact details, different ways telephone numbers, email addresses, live chat, whatever you can offer, make sure you offer it, and then make sure you respond quickly, because there's obviously nothing worse. Someone sends you an email and then you don't respond quickly. That's going to really cast doubts in your buyer's minds. And anything else you can do, adding things like security seals, trust certificates, reviews, testimonials. I think all of that stuff, it's fairly easy to do. And so it really is a no-brainer that you should spend some time and make sure you cover all those points. So you can just Google, there's a lot of checklists online you can go through that can step you through that and make sure you cover all those areas. Okay, so on payment side, the next poll I have is, what do you think is the safest way to make payments online from a buyer's perspective? So the key here is that it's from a buyer's perspective. So if you're buying online, you're the buyer, what do you think is the safest payment method for you to use as a buyer? So, and then I guess, so this poll specifically around a buyer, and then I'm going to ask you also, I'll talk to you about from a seller's perspective. So from a buyer's perspective, I would say, I mean, this is, I guess, my opinion, but I'll tell you why I think that way, is that the safest is, okay, 34% of you said credit card, and I would agree with you. But still quite a few other people, 19% said instant EFT, 25% said manual EFT. Actually, if I combine the two EFTs together, that's higher than the credit card one. So the reason I would say credit card from a buyer's perspective specifically is because as a buyer, you actually have up to 181 days, you can repudiate that transaction. And you can actually, if you fill in a dispute form with your bank, within 180 days, your bank will generally just, without even asking the merchant normally, they will just reverse that transaction. Obviously, if you did make that purchase as a buyer and you say you didn't, if you repudiated it, that is actually fraud. But it's quite hard to prove. So if you are a buyer going around buying things, if you made a payment and you never received the goods, you go to your bank, you fill out your form, you say, I paid, I never received the goods, and the bank will reverse that transaction. However, if you use any of those other payment methods, as a buyer, possession is 9/10 of the law. You can't actually get those funds back without the seller making a payment to you. And so if they were dodgy for any reason, you're actually at a loss. Whereas from a seller's point of view, so if you're the merchant, you're selling, then I would agree with you. I think an EFT option or even cash, well, cash is not safe purely from a security point of view, I guess, just from if you get hijacked or stolen. But from an EFT point of view, I would argue as a merchant, I would rather receive payment via EFT, actually for two reasons, because generally it's the payment method is cheaper than receiving via credit or debit card. But secondly, I can't get a surprise up to 180 days later that the buyer somehow says, truthfully or untruthfully, that they didn't receive the goods and they've requested a chargeback from their bank. So that's on payments. So moving on to the third pillar, which is an area that's close to my heart and what the problem we focused on solving at UAfrica. I think it's probably the least sexy part of the whole e-commerce chain, but probably the one that's maybe sort of initially at least ignored the most. It's kind of like the forgotten child. So sometimes I think people only think about it once they receive their first order and they realize that they now need to ship, get that order to their customer. So one of the things on this I wanted to, I come across a lot of people talk about, I think it is human nature where, just people want instant gratification, where they talk about the speed of delivery. So everyone wants, they're even talking about same day delivery or, how fast is the delivery. In my experience, from what I can tell, is that the delivery time is perhaps less important than communicating well to the customer about when they can expect to receive it. So if it's going to be 3 to 4 days delivery using some economies type service, I think that's fine as long as you communicate that really well with your customer and you keep them up to date throughout the entire order process. So once the order is placed, and this goes along with the trust and safety and security aspect as well, you keep them up to date throughout the entire process. And if for some reason there's a delay, critically important to update them of the situation. And I think in most cases you'll find, as long as you've communicated with people, they will be okay with it if there are changes to the thing. But the worst thing to do, even if you said, 1-day delivery, even if you can do faster, but you don't follow through on that, I think that is much worse than having a longer delivery time and rather communicating clearly to your customer throughout that whole process. So what I thought I would do is, obviously not yet to sell you Africa services, but I'll take you through our thought process on the sort of all the points we set out to try and address from a logistics point of view. And then you can make sure that whatever logistics solution you choose to use for your business, that you can tick as many of these boxes as you possibly can. So the first thing is we offered what we call multi-carrier solution. So it's quite interesting. We're very surprised how many different couriers offer different prices and specialize in different areas and even different areas. So depending on what you're shipping and where you're shipping it to, it can vary quite different between the couriers, and one courier may be better than another depending on what you're shipping. So the first thing is to find the right courier for what you're using. If you're shipping just one type of goods the whole time, that's fine. Maybe one is suitable. If you're doing different sized goods in different areas, it may be worth looking at multiple options. So the other thing which we did at Africa was we made variable costs. So sort of you could start off slow and still scale up. So if you're shipping one order a week or hundreds per week, you could scale up as your business grows with that. And the other thing we find, most of especially on the small business side, people aren't able to, or they don't have the resources to be able to do integrations. So it's all well and good that these courier companies and platforms have these APIs and all that, but you aren't necessarily technical or don't have the resources to pay someone to do it. So for us, it's important to be able to integrate. I mean, we still find a lot of people handwriting labels, which is just crazy. The idea is, your order should be able to come in and seamlessly, literally from a click of a button, be able to generate a label, from that generate the shipping label and be able to ship. Of course, if we can in the process save time and money. So the idea is to be able to leverage sort of high volumes where you can, and then you'll be able to, like for example, Africa, we're able to negotiate cheaper rates with the couriers, and then we add a small markup, but then we're able to pass that on to our customers as well. I think critically for me, leading on from the communication, is to provide a better experience for your buyers. So what we've done there is throughout the whole process from when the order is created, which automatically comes through to our system, we send we're allowed to communicate with your buyers, but we do it in such a way that your brand is carried through. So we try and make you the hero sort of it, and we just the tools behind it, so that as the tracking process goes from collection to at the depot, out for delivery and so on, that sort of happens seamlessly throughout the system. So I think that, like I've said, that communication I think is critical. Those are some things to think about from a logistics point of view. Which leads me to our last poll, which this is maybe a little bit unfair to ask this question, but I guess it's more a discussion point, but I am curious to know, what do you think, or for your business, how do you structure shipping? How should the cost that the buyer pays as they go through the checkout, how should that be structured? Should it be free shipping? Should they not have to pay for shipping? In other words, you have to build it into your product cost. Should it be a flat rate across the country, like someone like CATALOGUE does, 60 Rand shipment, say, or variable rate depending on where it's shipping to? Or do you think it's an opportunity to actually add to your profit margins? So I guess there's, as you would know, there's probably no right answer to that question. So most of you said, in fact, half of you, 50% said flat rate nationwide. And only 6% said free shipping. I'm surprised at that. Then the next highest was a variable based on location, variable cost based on location. Okay, I'm glad only 6% of you said to add to your profit margins. I think that's fairly clear to me. I think that is a mistake some people make, is they try and make money out of the shipping. And I think it's, it obviously depends on a lot of factors. It depends on what you're selling and your business and so on, competition as well. I would say that in generalizing, you want to make your shipping cost as low as possible, to the extent even where you can subsidize it. And I know of a lot of sellers who use it also as a marketing tool. So if your average basket size is say 800 Rand, maybe you could make free shipping over 1,000 Rand to encourage people to add something else, the average buyer to add something to their basket. They can add it or add it on, which maybe they wouldn't have otherwise. But in general, I think one of the negative things we have in South Africa's sort of ecosystem is that in general, I think the shipping rates charged are too high. I think in some cases, merchants themselves are maybe being charged too high for shipping. So I would encourage you to try and shop around, and obviously you have to balance up service. It's not only the cheapest option available. But I think in general, it is a bit of a barrier, and we've seen from the research we've done that there's a big drop-off during checkout when people get to shipping if there's unreasonable shipping charges being charged. So the last pillar is the marketing pillar. So it's all very well and good to have your website set up, a nice, pretty website that people can come, they can pay. Once they've bought something from you, you can ship it to them. But of course, it's not a case of build it and they will come, unfortunately. You have to market your website, and there's no silver bullet when it comes to this. It's a lot of hard work. Paid advertising is one area that I would encourage you to look at. That could be Google Ads, Facebook advertising. The sellers, so this is often, people find this very daunting because it can be a little bit technical as well. But the merchants that I've seen have the most success are those that have educated themselves on this, at least, even if they do end up outsourcing it. And the ones that have had the most success even have done it themselves. They've upskilled themselves, they've done courses, figured it out, and experimented with it. So you can, the nice thing is you can experiment with very low costs, like 1,000 Rand, even on Google AdWords, and you can get some results and tweak it and learn and go along. So I would strongly encourage you to do that. A lot of people I see they find it daunting and they just want to outsource it to someone else, which is obviously, there are good agencies out there, but generally you also have to be at a certain level before it makes sense to do that. I think it's one of the oldest forms of online marketing and still one of the most effective, which is email marketing. Personally, I would be working at building up an email base because it's something that you can remarket to very cost effectively, whereas with some of the other forms of paid advertising, you kind of have to keep paying, to carry on with the marketing. So I would encourage you to use those tools out there, be it MailChimp or whatever the case is, to build up a customer base. And then to use other sales channels. So use Takealot, use BiddleBuy, sell across, use price comparison websites, use Facebook, even Instagram, Twitter, all those other channels that you can use, experiment with them and use them. And then lastly, I think most important actually for me is word of mouth. So when I was, I'm not operationally involved anymore, but when I figured out that it was going back quite a few years now, but we could get, say, 100 Rand for every, it would cost us 100 Rand in paid advertising to get every customer, but then I knew that for every paid customer I got, I could get 2 more through word of mouth. And then that obviously can factor into my equations. And I think if nothing else, obviously from a cost point of view, the most cost-effective way of doing it, of getting new customers, but also I think tells you that you're on the right track if other people are referring your business. I think that's very important gauge for your business. So to finish off, one of the last points I just wanted to make was, what I see a lot of people doing is trying to perfect their websites before they launch. So what I would do is I encourage you to launch as quickly as possible. It's one of my favorite sayings is by Reid Hoffman. He's the founder of LinkedIn. He said that if you, the first version of your site that you launch to the public, if you're not embarrassed by it, then you've launched too late. So yeah, so that says that you should actually rather put something out there sooner. It's not going to be, there's another saying, perfect is the enemy of good enough. So I see a lot of people trying to perfect their website, and invariably you'll find you'll launch it and you'll need to make changes anyway. So I'd say my advice to you would be just to get something out there. You should probably be embarrassed about what you've launched and just learn from it and then iterate from that. So be very agile. So yeah, I think I'll just finish off with a quote from Jeff Bezos, if there's no one better I could think of. And that is, whether it's offline or whether it's online, it's all about customer experience. So I think that's a very important thing. After all, everything, you need to put the customer at the forefront of your website. Jeff Bezos said, the best customer service is if the customer doesn't need to talk to you, it just works. So that's pretty much the end of my presentation. I see we're on 45 minutes, so I guess I will end there. Thanks very much.
Andy, the fantastic questions that have come in. I suggest let's go from the top and work our way down, but they're really good questions.
Okay. Okay, first question there. Do you see the e-commerce boom being sustainable? Oh, yes, that's a great question. So, I mean, you saw that graph I showed you from Africa with the number of shipments. So, yeah, we are watching that with sort of bated breath, with anticipation, like can it keep going up? Or, we would actually be really satisfied even if it could just level off where it is now and just sustain it for the rest of the year. But, historically, we've seen this from now on, sort of from September, especially October, November, we see literally all the growth for the year generally happen then. So we generally see the first half of the year being relatively flat, and we see this growth accelerate towards the end of the year. So, I mean, obviously it remains to be seen, but I'm optimistic. I don't want to jinx it, but I think, I don't know if I were to have a guess, I think we're on a sustained growth path now, and I think maybe even it's South Africa's time for its exponential growth. So yeah, if I were to have a guess, I think it is sustainable. I certainly hope it is. Is e-commerce working well for small businesses with small turnovers? Sure, yeah. So I think I don't want to also create a misperception out there. There's no silver bullet. I think I saw a stat that for every 3 online businesses, this is SMEs that go online, only 1 of them survive. So I think there's clearly the opportunity there, but I think you need to accept it's like any business. It requires work, it requires dedication, perseverance. You're not going to have an overnight success. You need to be prepared for a little bit of a slog. So I think if you put in the effort, be prepared to be agile, there's definitely opportunity there. I mean, I saw Massmart did their results today. It came out, I think they reported R1 billion loss for the first 6 months, something like that. So I think traditional retail is, I'm sure it's had a negative growth, whereas online retail, we're talking about at least doubling and even tripling. So it's definitely a fantastic space to be in, but I think just go in with your eyes wide open and be prepared to experiment. And there's the opportunity to succeed, but it's not a guarantee. A lot of people want to ride the e-commerce wave, but are worried that they're too late. What do you think will happen when things get back to normal? Yeah, I think obviously you would be in a much better position if you're already online and you could just grow on, you could build on that. There's no question about that. But, today is better than tomorrow. So I would get going. I think, yeah, I would caution you against this, this sort of gold rush mentality. I think there definitely is opportunity. There's no question about that. But yeah, be prepared, just like any business, for the long haul, as I've been saying. Just on that, also one of the concerns I do have is that some people are going to rush into this, or even the established players, they're getting this huge increased demand, and they're not servicing their customers as well as they should be. And I think that could actually have a negative impact on the industry. So if you, in the past, were a hesitant online buyer, and now you push to try it, and you have a bad experience, that's obviously going to be negative. So I think you do need to bear that in mind as well. You need to make sure that if you are going to go this route, that you can provide a good service to your customers. What are good prices to charge for e-commerce setup, especially for small business? So here, I would honestly encourage you to do it yourself. So the cost is your time. So if you're a small business, I would assume probably, or if you fall into the bracket of being time rich and money poor, then I would say you can figure, all the information is there, and you don't have to pay for it. If you're not very technical, I would suggest starting out with something like Shopify. You can go out, there's a lot of information online, a lot of tutorials. Go through, you need this website, you need the payment gateway. So start with Shopify. My pick, I'm biased, so take it with a pinch of salt. Go Shopify on the storefront, go with PayFast on the payment gateway, go with UAfrica on the logistics, on the marketing, experiment with some Google AdWords and some social media perhaps, and figure it out for yourself. It doesn't have to cost you anything other than your time. But yeah, if you do want to pay someone to do it, I'm not that familiar with cost, but I imagine you could get someone to help you set up for under 10,000 Rand if you're starting off small. Yeah, but I would strongly encourage you to do it yourself, not necessarily for the cost saving, but for the learning and to understand your business. So if I could start from scratch, what business and niche would you tackle in e-commerce in South Africa at this time? This doesn't have to be a pure catalog play, of course, but anywhere in the supply chain. I think, so I don't know if this is what you're alluding to, but I think there's a big opportunity. There's a lot of people, most people source their products in China, right? So that's the source where people get a lot of their stuff. They go onto Alibaba or AliExpress and they order small items. They might use a dropship model, which I'm not a big fan of at all. That's where you order directly from the supplier and they ship directly to your buyer. It's a very bad buyer experience and things get lost and takes a very long time, sometimes months to get to them. Not a great experience. I think there's an opportunity to consolidate buying in China and bringing it in bulk into South Africa and offering services throughout that sort of supply chain from there. So I think there's a lot of people selling things in South Africa. But for me, and maybe it's also because I haven't got a lot of experience in this and I don't really know how to go about doing it, but like to source product, I think is still a challenge, good product. And there's so much, millions of products available. But for me, the challenge is getting it here cost effectively, going through, there's all the tax issues, there's customs, there's duties, there's SARS, there's a few hoops you have to jump through to get it here. So I think there's an opportunity there. If you're talking about actual niches though, I don't know. I think it has to be something that you're passionate about. So I think that's more important, that you're knowledgeable about it, because I think if you're passionate about it, you're more likely to stick through the hard times and you're going to be able to add value to your buyers that buy from you. So I don't have something very specific in mind in that regard, but I'd say stick to something that you yourself are passionate about. How can we leverage SA's weak currency arbitrage? No, okay, let's go into the international e-commerce place. The costs in rands, yeah. So international, cross-border commerce, I think is another big area. And I think that is something that you can do. The challenge is the shipping, of course. So one way you could do this, so actually at UAfrica, we haven't solved this problem. It's one of the things we get asked a lot and we are trying to solve it, but I don't have the answers for you there yet. But one way you can do this is if you're able to, your challenge is the logistics really, I think ultimately, is getting the goods. Say, if you're going to have something manufactured here or made here, assuming it's a physical good, it's getting it once you have an order from wherever it is in the world, is getting it there. So one of the things you can do, and obviously it's going to depend on what the products are, is if you can bulk ship that, you can then get economies of scale, and then you can use like a 3PL, third-party warehouse. There's lots of them in Europe and in the US. So you can put your goods in the warehouse so they're closer to your actual ultimate end customer. So you can cost effectively get them there in bulk, leave them in the warehouse. And when the order comes, it's more cost effective to ship directly from that 3PL to your customer, wherever they are. But I think that's also one very undeveloped area, and I think it's an area that's going to grow in the future, and for sure there's opportunities there, cross-border commerce. Clients don't know that they see EFT as safer, but depends on demographics. Yeah, I agree with that, for sure. I agree with you. Clients are very scared of shipping fees. As a store owner, I worry about efficiency. Many courier companies are coining it and not encouraging more postage by even slightly lowering prices. Yes, I agree with you. This is an issue. I think it's something that is improving, though. It is changing. Shipping fees, yeah. So I think prices are coming down. I think we're on a bit of a unique situation in South Africa where post office is not necessarily a completely viable option. So it would be good, I believe, back in the day when the post office, going back many years, I know it's not the case now, but you could ship a parcel for 15 Rand through the post office and it was reliable and quick. I long for those days to come back. I think it could help, at least for competition. But I think you will see more competition in the space from the different couriers. And yeah, like I said, I'm surprised at the variable in prices between different services out there. So I would encourage you to shop around a bit, but obviously taking into account still providing good services. So I think I'd say that is one, I agree with you, it's one area that's still quite undeveloped in this country, and it's an area that us, we're at Africa, we're trying to tackle and hopefully will come down in the near future. We're not in the business of profiting from shipping. Our products are a passion and we want to get them to the client as quickly and as cheap as possible. They pay for the shipping. Okay, that's no question. I think it's reasonable to pass on the shipping cost to your customers, to not make a profit on it, but to at least pass it on to them. I think that's the least you need to do. And where possible, make it even less, I would argue, obviously depending again on your products and so on. But then if your upstream supplier is charging you a high amount, that also doesn't help. So like the previous person said. Don't forget affiliate marketing. Yep, I think affiliate marketing is definitely something you can work really well. Definitely you can add that into your mix. Does email marketing actually work? Personally, I find it offensive and intrusive. Yeah, I also find it, I hate spam. So obviously I'm not advocating spam, but I'm advocating building up a loyal following. So it's quite interesting actually. I hate spam so much that I would also be very reluctant to send emails out to my customers, say. And then I was introduced to this idea by an email marketer. He told me, this guy in America, he said, once he does everything he can to get people legitimately onto his mailing list, and then he spams them. Okay, not spamming them because they've given him permission, but he emails them a lot. And his objective is to get them to do one of two things. One, either buy from him, or two, unsubscribe. Because he's saying if they're not buying from me, then there's no point being on my list anyway. So as much as I hate getting emails as much as anyone else, potentially from spam point of view, I think that did make me think about it a bit further and think, well, build up a list, they've given you permission, and then email them lots, and either they're going to buy from you or unsubscribe. So you're going to, you just want one of those two outcomes. And so in my experience, it does work. But I think the more value you can add to users, and it's not just sending them like sales pitch, it's like, so when we talk about niches and so on, is if you can actually provide them with interesting content, I think that is where you will actually build a loyal following, which ultimately will convert to sales. Okay, are there effective drop shipping suppliers in South Africa? Was it better to start a US Shopify store as a non-producer? Yeah, I think you could have a whole webinar just on drop shipping. I am not a big fan of it, certainly not when you drop shipping from internationally and it takes 2 months to get here and so on. There are some in South Africa, so there are a few people. There's one called Drop Store that's you can have a look at. And I think there are more coming online, but there's not, it's still very much in its infancy. So I can't really make any major recommendations with that. I would, my gut, without going into all the detail, I would in general suggest avoid drop shipping. Yeah.
Andy, we have time for maybe one more question.
One more question. Okay, let's see. One one more question. What advice on how to handle Black Friday and Cyber Monday this year? See, Jonathan Miller, I think that's OfferForge. He's here. So that's someone asked about the affiliate marketing. You can go look at OfferForge as one option. Okay, Black Friday, Cyber Monday. I would say you need to be as prepared as possible. Okay, some advice, just because obviously I'm coming from the logistics space, so that's what comes to mind straight away. Is, you know, it's your peak is the Friday, and then the Monday there's also a bit of a peak. I would suggest start planning to work that whole weekend, and start preparing your orders, and find out from the couriers that you're using whether they're working that weekend in order to handle the volumes. Many of them probably will. So one way you can delight your customers is actually, as soon as orders start coming in, start shipping them out, and you can get them, if you can get those orders to them sooner than they expect, I think that's where you can really delight your customers. So some of the couriers, I think, will even be operating on that Saturday. You can create your shipments, have them picked up, and then before your buyers expect it, they'll have their orders and have a great experience, rather than getting caught up in the surge and where many of the couriers are likely to be overrun and could possibly lead to delays. That would be my advice with my logistics hat on.
Fantastic. Andy, thank you so much. There were some amazing insights into this presentation, and we see why it's mission critical to up our game when it comes to e-commerce. It's a real opportunity. To all our attendees, that concludes today's session. It's clear that there's never been a better time to launch an e-commerce offering. We saw from some of those graphs. But as Andy says, go in with your eyes wide open.